Welcome to Business Talk with Meghan McNulty, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of business success and reveals the strategies, insights, and stories that drive these professionals to thrive in the ever-evolving world of business. Whether you're an established entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply fascinated by the world of commerce, this podcast is your front row seat to learn from the best. Each episode, Meghan will bring you engaging interviews with professionals from diverse industries who will share their triumphs, lessons learned, and the insights they've gained along the way. Hi, Brian. Thanks for being here today on my Business Talk podcast.
Great. Love to be here.
So I'd like to start out with talking to you about, your career and how you were recently CEO of Tax and Financial Group, and you stepped down, and most people would have slowed down after that, but you've doubled down on helping business owners one-on-one. What inspired you to make that shift, and how has your focus evolved?
Well, a couple things there. And again, thanks for having me on your podcast, Meghan. I was fortunate enough over my career to be able to develop some passive sources of income. So when the opportunity came to kind of slow down and resign as the CEO, I still wanted to develop business, but I wanted to only focus on things that energize me. And the thing that energizes me the most is to deal with business owners and professional people that have decided to be self-employed. They really energize me. What my experience has been there is that these people typically have a well thought out vision for themselves, their business, and their families. But oftentimes, because they're so busy running their businesses, this vision that they have for themselves and their business and family, their actual behaviors, perhaps call them planning behaviors, aren't 100% coordinated with the vision. If they engage me, or when I get the opportunity to engage with them, the byproduct of my work is that when we're finished, the experience that they have in the sense of being able to sleep well at night is awesome, and that's what energizes me, and that's why I'm doing this.
Amazing. What are some of the biggest financial blind spots you see even successful business owners have when it comes to planning beyond their businesses?
So I've been doing this for almost 44 years now. By far, the number one thing I see is that there's no formal business transition plan with business owners. So when you think about business owners in your audience out there, usually they fall into one of three categories. The first one would be a family business. So it's a father-son, father-daughter, could be the parents and the children. But the end game is they're gonna want to keep the business for the next generation, and without a well thought out, written out plan, a lot of times that doesn't, the vision and the actual behavior doesn't match up. The second type of business owner is just two people that are unrelated, so partners. So two people have a business, they're 50-50 partners. It could be three people in a business, a third. It could be four people in a business. But again, without a well thought out, written out business transition plan. Suppose one of the partners wants to retire. Suppose one of them has a premature death. Suppose somebody gets disabled. Suppose somebody gets divorced. What happens to the shares? What's supposed to happen? So again, the vision that they probably have and the actual behavior of what occurs usually isn't going to be matched up without the proper planning in there. Then the third type of business owner is somebody that doesn't have any family involved in their business, and they don't have any partners, so they're 100% owner. So the end game there is that sometime in the future, they're going to want a liquidity event, and they're going to want to sell their business. So what's the trigger for that? And what should they be doing with their financial statements so that when they do want to sell the business, they get top dollar? How should they be organizing their business in terms of, should it be an S Corp? Should it be a C Corp? Should it be an LLC? So that when they actually do sell the business in the future, they maximize the after-tax proceeds. So again, without a formal, well thought out written plan, a lot of those things become very problematic.
You often talk about moving from earned income to passive wealth. What does that mean, and why is it such a critical shift for founders? And what is passive wealth?
Yeah, so I don't usually use the term passive wealth. I use the term passive income.
Okay.
So the number one challenge you have as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, is that over time, you have to replace your earned income that you're making by operating your business with passive sources of income. It's very, very important, because as you get older, as you have more experience in life, as you get older, what you're going to want two things: more time and more money, do the things you love, and less time working.
Makes sense.
So
Okay.
that's why that's so critical. The other thing about that, you think about the business owners that we just described.
Mhm.
If you're the founder and it's a family business, it's going to be kept for your children or grandchildren or the next generation, and you haven't done a good job developing passive sources of income, you're gonna hold on too tight. And what I mean by that is you have adult children, perhaps you should give them more operational control over the business. But if your sole source of income is the business, you're going to be very reluctant to do that. It's almost like without these passive sources of income, your business is like the goose that laid the golden egg, and you're not going to want to give
Right.
the other people in your family the responsibilities to sort of mess things up. Because if they do, it directly affects you and your income. So if it was the situation where it's 100% owner and they're going to sell the business in the future, again, if he gets to that point where he has to sell the business or he wants to sell the business and he doesn't have a lot of other sources of passive income, he's kind of limiting his options, because perhaps he could sell the business for a little bit higher price, but he needs to take some payments. He needs to take a note. If, again, his sole source of income is his business, he's going to be reluctant to sell his business and take a note back. If perhaps instead of selling it to a third person, maybe over the years he's developed some younger guys in his company, key people, and again, he could sell the business to the key people, and the key people would earn the money to pay for his shares of the future profits that the business would generate. But again, if he doesn't have alternative sources or passive sources of income, he may be reluctant. Those options might not be available to him. So that's the number one challenge you have when you have your own business, is over time you need to replace the earned income that you make by running your business with other sources.
How do they do that?
Typically here in California, real estate, the kind of the natural thing would be, once I get my business up and running, I would, instead of renting space for my business, I would buy a building and put my business in there and own the building. That would, as time goes on,
Right.
the mortgage goes down, the equity in the building goes up. And again, if I sell the business or retire from the business, I'd still be the landlord and I'd collect rents.
Okay.
Another big thing would be retirement plans. So defined benefit pension plans, 401k plans, profit sharing plans, ESOPs. There's lots of ways other than just owning a building that you can collect over time passive sources of rent. Obviously, building a portfolio of stocks and bonds.
Okay.
And as time goes on, that'll be a source of passive income as well.
Okay. We work with a lot of families where the business is the biggest asset. What are some things they should consider so that their legacy doesn't become a liability?
Yeah, so again, the biggest thing that I've seen in family businesses is the lack of a formal written out business transition or business continuity plan. So that would be the first thing, is they need to get with an attorney. They need to figure out who gets what, when, and in what proportions. Once they figured that out, they need to create a financial condition model for all parties involved, so they can see the financial condition model before, and then with the transition of the business to the next generation, again, all parties concerned, what would the financial condition look like there? I can't tell you, in family businesses, so many times I've seen these perfectly written legal documents, and I know you're an attorney and you do these things, and they're beautiful documents, but nobody thought about the monies. Nobody thought about the economics of the situation. So the thing that was beautifully written never happened.
Right. As someone who's led an organization and now advises other leaders, how do you help clients start thinking about life and leadership after business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I tell entrepreneurs all the time that it's a journey. So when you first start out, time and money are in short supply. You work hard, you work a lot of long hours, you start to get some success. Over the years, you start to build net worth, you get some real estate, you get some homes, you get stocks and bonds, you get some retirement plans, you get some insurances, and you start to develop these passive sources of income. And one thing I remember, someone told me years and years and years ago, I don't want to butcher it, you have two lives. The second one starts when you realize you only have one. And when you get to that point where you have the passive sources of income and you have the financial strength, you can start living that life. So that's kind of what I tell the entrepreneurs and people I coach all the time.
In general, do you think that business owners are organized? Do they think they have their like estate plan in place and their finances in order, or not necessarily?
Again, I think it has to do with coordination
Okay.
because, business owners acquire assets at different times, often use different advisors. And as the years go on, they have different methods of distributing things. So a lot of times they have plans, but the plan isn't coordinated into one smoothly working plan. There's 3 or 4 or 5 plans, if you will. So it's important to coordinate them, under one smoothly working plan. When you think about it, again, we're talking about business owners, right? If you run a successful privately held business, that's a full-time job. And as you get older, if you were successful running your business, you've been able to acquire a net worth. You've been able to acquire some wealth. And to be a good steward of wealth, sometimes that's a full-time job. So here's a person getting older and he's got 2 full-time jobs. Things are bound to fall through the cracks.
Right.
So I would say for the most part, business owners can certainly improve upon their planning and things.
What's one story or client experience that really stuck with you and reminds you why this work matters?
Yeah, so it's kind of a sad story, but it was one that happened to me. I started a business when I was 21, right out of college. So I was probably in my late 20s. And it was a business situation number 2 people in business. There were 50-50 partners, and they made cabinets that you would mount servers on and computers, and then they would bolt the cabinets to the floor so that if someone broke into their business, they couldn't steal all the computer stuff because it was bolted into the floor. The one client was probably, he's probably in his late 30s, and the other guy was probably in his early 50s. And we talked to them about having a business transition plan, and they had this vision. And again, they wanted to get the right behaviors on paper. So we got insurance on the younger guy. The older guy was in the process of getting his insurance, but it wasn't issued. And for whatever reason, they were just dragging their feet about getting to the attorney to draft the proper purchase and sales agreement. So the younger guy was working in the business on a Saturday. He fell off a ladder, hit his head, and died. So the insurance paid off. So it was $1 million policy. It paid off and went to the company. The senior guy wrote a check out of the company to himself personally and sold or liquidated the business. So the other partner, his wife was 6 months pregnant with the second child and didn't work. So she got 50% of the liquidation value. The other guy got $1 million of cash plus half the sale or liquidation value. And that certainly wasn't the vision that they had. And to me, that always reminds me of the fact that, again, people have this vision about how things should work, but oftentimes the actual behaviors or planning, if you will, behaviors don't back it up.
Why do you think that happens?
And weird things happen. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I just make those observations. Yeah.
How do you think the financial services industry is going to change in the next few years as the baby boomers start to retire and we see less financial planners out there, which is projected, I guess? Yeah,
that's an interesting question. What I've noticed is that it's very difficult as a young person to get started in this business. The ways of marketing yourself are kind of in flux or in change. Like, how many people answer their phone?
No one.
Yeah. If you went to an industrial park and you went door to door, knocking on the door, asking if you could have 10 minutes with the business owner, how often would you actually meet the business owner? How often would you actually get an opportunity to talk? Like, never.
Yeah.
It's almost like marketing nowadays is an interruption.
Right.
And people are just way, way too busy for interruptions. That's evolving, and somehow that needs to be, that problem needs to be solved. People being able to market themselves, and how the vast majority of business owners do any kind of marketing activity as an interruption. But the other thing is, I think for people that can crack that code, can solve that, the future is extremely bright, because there's trillions and trillions of dollars that are going to go from the baby boom generation to the next generation, and they're going to need some advice about that.
I know, it's interesting. So, question with the business owners: when do business owners need to start planning for their retirement or a business continuity plan, I guess?
essentially from day one. They should be if you start a business, you should be thinking, okay, so when am I going to exit this thing?
Right.
And what my decisions, part of my decision making should be on how do I maximize the value
Of the business, yeah.
to me. Yeah. And the other
Okay.
thing is, again, what we talked about already, which is how do I replace my earned income with passive sources of income? That's why you're taking the risk of being in business,
Right,
is to get to that point in your life.
right,
You're not going to get there by working at Google
right,
or working for the city.
right.
Yeah. So
How do you think business owners think about like giving up their power at their company?
the people that are concerned about power
Oh, yeah.
probably aren't going to do too well as a business person. So again, I think control,
Control is a better word.
yeah, control is a better thing. So control is interesting. I think part of them being able to give up control is the fact that they have income separate and distinct from the operation of their business. The other thing is that once you get to a certain level of success, most people want to give back. Most people want to say, this was a good thing for me, and I see this person here, I should play this forward and teach them some things about it. But yeah, so control is very difficult to give up. A lot of people have control issues. Again, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't tell you what those issues are. But in the context of what we're talking about here this afternoon, if you have other sources of income other than your business, and it makes sense to give up some control to get the business maybe to a higher level, you'll be in a better spot to be able to do that emotionally.
I've noticed that a lot of successful business owners don't actually have an estate plan. Do you encourage, these business owners to get one? And why do you think that's not in place already?
Certainly, having the appropriate legal documents is very important. I think part of that, again, goes back to, the person's psychological makeup. Some people don't want to think about dying. Some people think about that way in the future. I'll get to it. I'll get around to it. But
Right.
right now, I got other pressing issues to deal with.
Right. My next question would be, what do you think about California residents who have really developed all their wealth on real estate, right? People here have a lot of real estate. How do you advise them, like if they want to get passive income or retire, to like diversify that?
So it depends why
Yeah.
would they need cash?
I don't know.
So
It's interesting.
in my
The
experience,
assets aren't diversified.
yep, in my experience, people that are successful in real estate, they got everything in real estate.
Right.
And they really have no liquidity, right? And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I think actually it's probably pretty good. But the thing that they're missing is if they want to continue that real estate to the next generation, there's going to be some sort of inheritance or taxes of some sort, right? Let's call them transfer costs.
Right.
Whether they're taxes or not, who knows? But there's going to be some costs in transferring that wealth to the next generation. And that's where they have to have the written out plan
Right.
about how do I transition the real estate to the next generation, and then create a financial condition model that models what it is they want in terms of who gets what, when, and what proportions.
Okay.
And we can do that for people. And a lot of times their eyes get open to, okay, yeah, I see.
What if a business owner wants to come to you and say, look, I want to sell my company? What steps would that you go through with them to do that?
Yeah, so the first thing I asked the guy, has he ever bought or sold a business before? Because, if it's the first time that you're doing something, how well do you do it? Not very well, right?
Right.
I mean, we're
Right.
humans, right? So if this is the first time he's going to sell his business, or the first time he's sold a business, or even purchased if he's never purchased a business and the business he started from scratch, yeah, he's going to need a lot of hand holding in terms of how the game's played.
Okay.
And understanding about how the game's played. So what I do is I'm not an investment banker. He'll hire, depending on the size of his business, he'll hire a business broker or an investment banker. But I can explain to him, this is how this game's played, so he feels much more confident about what's going to happen when he puts the thing up for sale.
Okay. What else would you like to tell us about wealth management and helping business owners?
You impact people's lives, your time's your own, and you make as much or as little money as you want. So it's been great.
When you refer people to estate planning attorneys, what do you want the estate plan? What would impress you about the estate planning attorney?
I usually look for three things.
Okay.
So the first thing I look for is someone that technically is competent. because I think there's nothing worse than a legal document that would be deficient in some manner or form. So the first thing I look for is the person technically competent in the subject matter that requires the legal document. The second thing is that I want the documents done quickly. I want the attorney to be able to do the documents quickly and in a short period of time.
Okay.
And then the third thing, obviously, is hopefully the fees are reasonable for the work that's required.
Okay.
So those are the three things I look for.
It's good to know. Okay. And for fun, for those of you who don't know, Brian's my dad. So what do you think about me having a podcast?
I think the podcast is great. And again, I'm very proud of you because, again, you could work for a corporation and get a salary, or you could be entrepreneurial and, work for yourself. So I think, again, working for somebody else is risky. It may not appear that way because you get a salary. But I think if you bet on yourself and you're entrepreneurial, that's the future and that's the way to go. So
thank you.
Yeah, very proud of you.
Okay.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the Business Talk podcast and leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. Thank you for joining us today. This has been another episode of Business Talk with Meghan McNulty.